I am in Alamogordo, New Mexico at the New Mexico Museum of Space History. This museum is supposed to have some very interesting space artifacts and the grave of Ham, the Astrochimp. So this should be pretty interesting. Let's go check this out. The museum is housed in this golden cube set against the magnificent Sacramento Mountains. There are several outdoor displays with rockets and some airplanes, but I'll take a look at those after going inside. There is an Apollo command module boilerplate mock-up that was used to test out ocean recoveries. Here's a Nighthawk trainer. Trainees would sit in there and practice with the Nighthawk's controls. Here is a replica Mercury capsule made by NASA. These are similar to the capsules used to send the first 6 Americans into space. Visitors can come in and enjoy the cramped quarters. I cannot believe men were stuck in here for days on end, let alone in outer space. This is a Thor engine with its cradle. This type of rocket was used as the first operational ballistic missile deployed by the Air Force back in 1955. This is an H-1 rocket engine, which was developed for the Saturn rockets during the Apollo program. Alright, let's head in. This is a NASA blue flight suit worn by astronaut Danny Olivas during training. It is recommended to start up on the top floor and go down from there, so that's what I'm gonna do. And made it to the 5th floor. This is a bust of Colonel John Paul Stapp, the fastest man alive. In 1954, he set a world speed record of 632 miles per hour in 5 seconds. Here's a timeline of the wider scale history of physics, flight, and spaceflight. They also have a large collection of space patches. NASA appears to make lots of commemorative space patches for all the various programs and launches. There's patches for Columbia and Challenger. And here are some more recent patches, which include some from SpaceX. This area is under renovation, but there's a replica primitive telescope and a model of a satellite. This is a model of the world's first liquid fuel rocket, designed and launched by Dr. Robert Goddard. He lived in Roswell, New Mexico for much of his career. This is the injector head of a liquid fuel rocket motor from one of Goddard's rocket tests. This is an Arcus rocket. These were used extensively at the White Sands Missile Range to collect data. There is a spectacular view out these windows over Alamogordo. I can see why they designed it like a big glass cube now. Beyond the city, the White Sands are visible. It looks like there's just a white stripe on the horizon. Most of the white sands that are visible from here are part of the national park, but to the north and farther west is the White Sands Missile Range. There was a space harbor at White Sands. Some space shuttles were landed there. This museum is home to the International Space Hall of Fame, commemorating various individuals for their contributions and explorations in space. Here are some of the first inductees, like Gus Grissom and Astro Senator John Glenn. The Apollo 11 astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins are of course in the Hall of Fame. They have a special display out in memory of Michael Collins, who passed away recently in late April of 2021. This looks like a Mexican Spanish language commemoration of Collins' role during Apollo 11. And here are some artifacts and accolades of Michael Collins, including a hard hat worn by the one-time loneliest man in history. I think there's supposed to be a pretty significant chunk of moon rock in there, but it's missing. But they do have an Apollo lunar sample return container. Overall, the Apollo astronauts brought back 842 pounds of lunar rocks and soil in these boxes. Here is an armillary sphere, a really cool looking tool that would have been used by the Greeks and others to observe the heavens. This film viewer was first used by Nazi German engineers to view film of their V-1 buzz bomb test flights, but after the war the Americans liberated it and used it to study American missiles at White Sands. They probably had those same Nazi scientists doing it here as well. This is pretty cool. A miniature replica of the Trinity Test Site Monument, surrounded by Trinitite, which was produced by the 1945 Trinity Test, the first atomic bomb explosion that occurred right here in southern New Mexico, near the White Sands. A much larger monument that looks like that now stands at the epicenter of the explosion. It's only made available to visit 2 days out of the year. At some point I want to try to time that, but for now this will have to do. There's a replica of Sputnik, the world's first satellite that was launched by the Soviets in 1957 and really freaked out Americans. Here are a couple of very powerful telescopes that were developed by Project Moonwatch to keep track of Sputnik. There is a replica of Explorer 1, the first successful American satellite launched into orbit 4 months after Sputnik. This is actually pretty amazing. This replica of the light side of the moon hung behind Walter Cronkite during his famous CBS TV coverage of the moon landing in 1969. That's an interesting and unexpected piece of TV history right there. There's a variety of miniature Apollo space capsules and rockets in here. You can compare the size of human astronauts to some of these early rockets. That is a Gargoyle, which was one of the Navy's first radio-controlled guided missiles, a predecessor to both modern-day drones and space probes. And here is a tiny space shuttle. This is a space station mock-up. It shows what the International Space Station and other previous stations have looked like, and it shows what kind of work they do up there. There's also an interactive control room, but it's closed off due to the pandemic. Alright, this is one of the highlights of the museum. This is the Mercury primate capsule used by Ham the chimpanzee when he became the first chimp to go to space. On January 31st, 1961, Ham entered space while sitting inside this little couch capsule atop a Mercury Redstone rocket. He traveled nearly 5,900 miles per hour to an altitude of 127 miles above Earth. Right in there, he became the first chimpanzee to experience weightlessness. He was up there for about 7 minutes, then experienced 15 G-forces during his re-entry into the atmosphere. After much training with some controls at the nearby Holloman Air Force Base, Ham was able to press all critical buttons during his short mission and safely landed back to Earth, with a bit of a bruised nose, but otherwise he was fine. The first Astrochimp essentially confirmed that it was safe for humans to go up into space, so he paved the way for Alan Shepard and Gus Grissom, who followed soon after. This was Ham's restraint suit. It's a custom spacesuit made for the chimpanzee to fly in space. I believe this is the one he wore on the mission, which is pretty amazing. Ham is actually buried here on the museum grounds, so we'll visit his grave later. As mentioned, Ham was trained at the nearby Holloman Air Force Base, and these are some of the mock-up panels he was trained on to push and pull buttons and levers to prepare for the mission. Susan Helms wore this shirt on board the Space Shuttle Endeavour. The views of the mountains out the windows are incredible. This museum has a great location. The next exhibit is all about rockets in history. I am definitely not an expert on this stuff, so I don't have too much I can say. This is an original guidance system for a German V2 rocket used for some research. That's a Delta engine cutaway used to power the 1970s Delta rockets. Some of these rocket engines are pretty massive, although there are much bigger that probably don't fit in this museum. Here's an XLR-11 rocket engine, used to power high-speed aircraft. Here's a Javelin 4th stage motor, which was used to send payloads into the upper atmosphere during the 50s and 60s. The Central Inertial Guidance Test Facility was based at Holloman. This is from a Titan II missile. Here are some Midget Man missile parts. They were tiny ICBMs. This is a Nike Cajun rocket, used to carry instruments into the upper atmosphere during the 1960s. And that is an Aerobee 150 sustainer, which served a similar purpose. Aerobees were used from the late 1940s to the mid-50s. Here is an Apollo Primary Guidance, Navigation, and Control System, one of only 2 still in existence. It appears this whole section is closed off right now. This is a very thick window pane from the Launch Complex 5-6 blockhouse on Cape Canaveral. It's made up of 15 layers of glass and weighs 200 pounds. This window was just 300 feet away from the launch pad. It witnessed and was able to withstand the powerful blasts of Freedom 7 and the Liberty Bell 7, along with some other rockets and missiles. That is a scale model of Vostok 1, which carried the first human being, Yuri Gagarin, into orbit in 1961. Here's a big case full of astronaut memorabilia. There's some commemorations of Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space. Here are some EKG strips from John Glenn's Friendship 7 flight, along with some other relics related to the first American astronauts. This is an in-flight exerciser from the Gemini program. One of the things they were monitoring was the physical conditions of astronauts in space. With the weightlessness, they would have to use a pretty good deal of force to stretch this thing out. They had to do it twice per day during missions. There's a burnt up segment of the Gemini 7 capsule's heat shield, and a checklist used in the Gemini trainer. Some placards were used by the Apollo 7 astronauts during their live TV broadcast. I'm not sure if that turtle drawing there is the real thing or not. That was Wally Schirra's special football helmet chin strap worn during the Apollo 7 mission. Apparently he couldn't stand the regular astronaut chin straps. Here's a piece of the Apollo Block 1 display keyboard, basically the onboard computer. There's an Apollo 13 blister to protect the antenna during re-entry, and there's an unused Apollo Drive food pack, which includes fruit cocktail, sausage patties, cinnamon toasted bread cubes, and grapefruit. Sounds delicious. Here are some unflown command module pieces, like a canister used to remove carbon dioxide and light clamps. There's some astronaut hygiene kit items, Apollo ballpoint pens, and a urine collection bag. That's a command module window that never flew, and a translation control handle that also never made it big time. This is a control panel from an Apollo era crawler transporter. The crawlers were big vehicles that moved the spacecraft on Cape Canaveral. Here's a dental kit like the ones they used on Skylab, complete with a bone saw. There's a special recoilless space hammer used for in-flight repairs by a cosmonaut during the Salyut 6 space mission during the 70s. And there's a porthole from the Soyuz TM-32 mission to the ISS in 2001. Here are some more recent astronaut articles, including a flight shirt worn by Space Shuttle Commander Rick Houck. And here's a model of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. Here is a replica Mercury spacesuit that was made for a 2010s TV commercial. That is a replica Gemini spacesuit. It was actually worn by Ryan Gosling as Neil Armstrong in the film First Man. I appreciate this placard about old space tourism. These illustrations show what it was like to go to Titusville, Florida, and the Kennedy Space Center about 50 years ago. This is a Russian foral trout suit, which would be worn by cosmonauts in the event of a landing in snow or water. This is a replica So Cool cosmonaut suit. This one was worn by a guest actor in The Big Bang Theory when Howard went to the International Space Station. Here's a Skylab in-flight garments. And here's an Apollo spacesuit. This one was just for training. It was never worn in space. While the big moon rock is not out right now, they do have this small one in a prism that was collected by New Mexico's own Harrison Schmitt on the lunar surface with Apollo 17, the last moon mission. It says that this basalt sample is about 3.7 billion years old. It is the oldest thing most people will ever see. Harrison Schmitt wore this chronograph during the Apollo 17 mission, maybe even on the moon itself. Here's an Apollo fuel cell, which converted cryogenic oxygen and hydrogen into electrical power. This piece of granite from the Sandia Mountains over by Albuquerque was taken to space on board the Space Shuttle Atlantis. Here's a dinosaur fossil that has been to space. It's the tooth of an Albertosaurus that was found near Farmington, New Mexico, and it was the first dinosaur fossil to ever go to space. And here's a square of turquoise that has been to space and back. There's a Friden calculator, similar to those used by the Hidden Figures. They were the black women like Katherine Johnson who did important work at NASA back in the day. There's an Apollo service propulsion system. And here's an Apollo reaction control system engine. There's a Lego tableau of the Apollo 11 first lunar landing. Here's an oxygen purge system, which was an emergency life support for astronauts. This is a model of the Skylab space station. Ah yes, and here's the space toilet, just like the ones that were in Skylab. Again, the interactive stuff is out of service. There's some satellites hanging from the ceiling. This museum was originally known as the International Space Hall of Fame, and it is still active with annual inductees. I noticed that filmmakers have been added recently, including Walt Disney, who became really interested in space and actually worked with Wernher von Braun to produce 3 Disney space education films. Below Disney is Fritz Lang, who made some early sci-fi films like Metropolis. Georges Méliès and George Lucas are also inductees for obvious reasons. Here are some bas-reliefs depicting the first class of the International Space Hall of Fame. That's Yuri Gagarin on the left and Walter Teal on the right. Unfortunately, they only made these for the first group. There is a small exhibit on Star Trek and its creator Gene Roddenberry. Here are some replicas of the Enterprise and other spacecraft. That is a screen-used prop of an Enterprise talisman. It was featured in the original series' Halloween special, when a witch used this to try and get Captain Kirk to do her bidding. And here is an authentic tribble from the original series. The tribbles reproduced very fast and kind of overwhelmed the crew. Here are some caveman spears from Season 1, Episode 16 of the original series. These collectibles have some autographs of cast members and Gene Roddenberry. Of course, there was lots of Star Trek merch and toys. This is pretty cool to see. The hazmat suit worn by Winona Ryder in the finale of Stranger Things Season 1 when she went into the Upside Down. And here's a suit that was worn by Nathan Fillion in both the TV show Firefly and the film Serenity. Here's a display about long-distance space probes that are sent out to pass by and photograph planets, moons, and other faraway features. Well, I am quite impressed with this place. I thought the exhibits were really interesting, and there are some awesome artifacts. But there's plenty more to see outside. Why yes, Ham, I did enjoy my visit. The John P. Stapp Air and Space Park has some big rockets and other relics. But don't climb on anything, because violators may be abducted by aliens. This is an X-7A test vehicle. This is an XQ-4A drone, which made its first free flight at Holloman in 1956. Here are the blown up remains of an American V-2 rocket engine that was launched right by here at White Sands. Of course, many of the German scientists ended up bringing their V-2 technology to the United States after the war. The green missile over there is an Aero B-150. These were tested at the White Sands Missile Range. This is an F-1 rocket engine, the most powerful single-chamber liquid fuel rocket engine ever flown. There's a Nike Ajax with its launcher. There's a ground meteorological device from the 50s. This massive rocket is known as the Little Joe 2. These were used to test the Apollo launch escape system and the command module parachutes. The testing of which did occur at, you guessed it, White Sands. This is an authentic IGOR station, IGOR being an acronym for Intercept Ground Optical Recorder. It was used at the White Sands Missile Range in the 50s and 60s to track and photograph the missile tests. That's what the inside looks like. This is a PTV, or Parachute Test Vehicle. Here's the shoe of a crawler transporter. This is a German Air Force Tornado that was based here at Holloman. And there's another one of the IGOR recorders from the missile range. And here just below the museum is a very sacred place, the gravesite of Ham the Astrochimp. After Ham's legendary 1961 voyage, the primate space pioneer was retired and lived at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., but because of that he was apparently isolated and didn't have the best conditions, so in 1979 he was moved to the North Carolina Zoo, where he could hang out with the other chimps. He passed away there on January 19, 1983. He was 27 years old. Tribute bananas are left on the grave out here in the desert sun. They are now black instead of yellow. Ham's grave also apparently marks Earth's correlating latitude point to the Apollo 11 Tranquility Base latitude on the moon. I'm not sure how that works, but okay. It's pretty amazing to visit the grave of the first hominid to venture out into space. This is the Daisy track, an important decelerator sled track used for impact and deceleration, or G-force testing, at the Holloman Air Force Base for decades. This track was primarily used to test the deceleration of equipment and human beings on equipment from 1955 to 1985. They did test many harnesses for high-speed aircraft and even spacecraft seats, including the testing of the Apollo command module seats on this very track. Colonel John Stapp, whose bust we saw inside, did a lot of work with the Daisy track for crucial seatbelt testing. His research on the importance of wearing seatbelts was done on this track, and that led to the first federal seatbelt law in America during the 60s. Of course, a lot of people still didn't wear them. This was the first Daisy track sled, which was designed to decelerate a 350-pound payload by 200 G-forces with a person on top. This is an omnidirectional sled where the seating could be changed. It was used for the Apollo astronaut tests in this very position. This is a bopper sled. It was used on a similar track at Holloman to test low impact crash forces. The Daisy track is pretty neat to see. This is an important piece of automotive, aviation, and space history. This is the Astronaut Memorial, dedicated to the American astronauts who lost their lives in tragic accidents, like the crew of Apollo 1, Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee. This plaque is dedicated to the 7 killed in the horrific Challenger explosion, including school teacher Krista McAuliffe. And this one is dedicated to the 7 who perished on the Space Shuttle Columbia. So that was the New Mexico Museum of Space History. This is a great and fairly unique museum, and of course seeing the grave and capsule of Ham the Astrochimp was awesome. Definitely come visit this museum. If you enjoyed this video, then please like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. Also take a look at my other videos featuring air and space museums across America, along with other types of museums, historic sites, roadside attractions, national parks, and more. Thanks for watching.